the refactoring. So, but now I'm enjoying a nice week off, and then I'm off starting a new job. So yeah, the busy times, but also fun times.
Ah, fantastic!
How
It
you
sounds
doing?
amazing.
How are you, Stace?
I'm not doing too bad. I did some refactoring myself over the summer to get the Lego on display, but I'm still working up to the fantastic display you've got behind you. I've got to get lighting and colors organized. I just used old bookshelves.
Yes, excellent.
But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Looking forward to that. Okay, cool. Let's handle some of the official stuff first before we announce our guests. So let me share the screen. All right. So again, an online meetup edition. Yeah, we still don't know when we'll be back in real life. It will happen someday, but for now and for probably the near future, it will still be online.
The numbers are not fantastic right now.
Yeah, exactly, indeed. But online is also nice. I mean, I do miss everyone in real life, so really. Always the first Wednesday of the month, we'll do this meetup with usually 2 speakers and a Q&A afterwards. If you want, you can join our Discord, and we would very much like you to join our Discord, because there you can ask questions, chat a bit with people who are organizing this, chat with the speakers, ask some questions there. You can do a bit of networking. So please use this QR code or this link to join our Discord server. Another very important fact, we have a code of conduct. Please visit this link to read it in its entire form. Very short, just be kind to one another. And we're always looking for speakers. So if you have an idea on a certain topic that is related to serverless, doesn't matter which cloud, doesn't matter which technology you're using, which tech you're using, anything is good. Just drop us a note. You can contact us either via email or via Twitter, or of course via our Discord server. And if you're new to speaking, we would also like to help you. So if you need to do a practice run, or you want your slides reviewed or anything like that, we are more than welcome to give you a hand with that. Is there anything else? No, that was already the last slide. Wow, that's nice. That's nice. All right, so let's.
Nice concise slide pack these days.
Yes, I like it. All right, let's invite our 2 guests. Let's add Igor first, and there's also Marek, but let's do a short hello.
Yeah,
welcome.
Good evening, both.
Hey, everyone.
Oh.
So, we'll be starting off with Igor, but Marek, it's also very nice to have you already available here. He is also a co-organizer, so he's also helping out now and then with this meetup, so thanks a lot. But for now, we're going to focus on Igor. So, Mark, see you later.
Yes. Hello, guys. Thank you for inviting me here. Very excited to be part of. Yeah, it's awesome to be part of ServerlessDays. I think big movement made so many good things for the community.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining, Igor. Could you tell a bit about yourself?
Yeah, basically, I have a slide about that. But in short, yeah. In short, I'm a serverless consultant, working with different clients on the serverless API level. Nowadays, working with big Dutch retailer. So very excited to be here. So I'm chatting with Amsterdam every day, and I'm already used to be in a Central European time zone because I'm based in Finland, and we have Eastern European time here.
Okay, so it's a different time for you then.
Yes, it's 1 hour difference.
Right, so it's even later.
So I'm in the future.
Thank you for joining us. And you're going to be talking to us today about using CloudFormation for creating your infrastructure.
Basically Cdk, but Cdk is a CloudFormation in the end.
Which it's reading the abstract for this, I can't wait to see this one. I mean, I work generally in Azure more than in AWS. But the one thing that I truly hate is trying to go through a 400 or 500 line YAML template, trying to figure out just why stuff doesn't work. So I'm really looking forward to this talk.
Yeah, it's amazing what trap we created for ourselves as a community when we are doing infrastructure in YAML. And I think infrastructure as a real code and not configuration is doing the trick, and that's why I'm talking about it today.
Awesome.
All
So I
right.
will
Well,
start sharing.
the stage is yours. Yeah, please share your screen, and I will remove us from the stream, and you can go ahead.
Yeah. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello again. So now I'm starting. Very excited to be here, and I would like to convince you in this very short presentation that Cdk and serverless are created for each other, and they are much more straightforward than you think. So who am I? As I said already, I'm serverless contractor. I'm 2 times certified with AWS, developer associate and solutions architect. It took me almost 3 years to get solutions architect, which is a very nice journey to be into. And 1 month ago, I became AWS community builder because I was honestly saying that, guys, I would like to join to this program because it will be a motivation for me to write more about AWS. And I started to talk and write about it more. And I'm a big fan of Cdk and serverless. And you can follow me on Twitter. What's my story? I came to serverless space even in 2018 when I have been to one of the JS conference, and those times I have been working in Java monolith, and I understood that this is the future of software development for me. So I will be super happy of not using Java classes and this abstraction over abstraction things. So that's why already in 2019, I was certified with developer associate, and I used AWS Lambdas with serverless framework those times and Terraform. And we tried to make them happen together. It was nice. And then in 2020, I discovered that there is tool called Cdk. I was already in the project with CloudFormation, and I saw the pain points of it. And one of the team leads said to me that Cdk can be a future, and I was thinking, yeah, I should definitely try it. And in 2021, this is the end of the year, and already now I launched 3 projects with different setups and companies and different teams, and I'm trying to educate inside teams of how it can be done better. I'm talking about infrastructure. So today I will be talking you a little bit what is Cdk and make an introduction to it. After that, I will review some other tools. I will talk about Cdk mechanism shortly, and also make an example of serverless related topics with Cdk. So what is Cdk? Very brief, taken from the official website of AWS. Basically, it's a framework which gives you the ability to write your infrastructure as a real code. When I'm saying real, it means that it will be languages like Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, and I think Go now. Haven't tried it, but if somebody have the experience, it would be nice to hear some of the impressions. So what have been used for provisioning infrastructure before? Mostly I saw Bash a lot, JSON YAML, because CloudFormation is done with it, and HCL, which is used by Terraform. And what are competitors of Cdk? I think CloudFormation and SAM are doing their jobs well, and I saw already many projects which are AWS focused, which are basically done with them. And I think SAM is kind of CloudFormation on steroids, so it's solving a lot of problems, and it's helping to write especially serverless applications faster. And for example, connecting event triggers is much easier. Also, there is Terraform and Serverless. Serverless is basically a YAML approach. Also, there is Pulumi, but I have not tried with it. And I think somebody could tell more about it, but not me, because I haven't worked with it. With my experience of the advantages of the different deployment tools that CloudFormation and SAM, they are kind of officially supported. And I think it's super nice because all the new features are coming straight away there. And there is also Terraform, which can be awesome for multi-cloud solutions where one team can work in Google Cloud and Azure and AWS. That's why I think consultancies like to use them. And also the biggest advantage of Terraform for me is that it has modules, and you can group all the resources together, which like in blocks. For example, you can create networking block where it will be set up of VPC endpoint, for example, and security groups. And then in the other in the other module, you can connect it with your application. And also there is serverless framework. It was a big thing for me when I have started, but after that, I stopped using it. And I'm thinking through these years that serverless frameworks creates this low barrier to enter into serverless space, and especially creating lambdas and APIs with DynamoDB is super easy, which is quite straightforward with this framework and super short to write. But it's still YAML, and I think all of these advantages are basically now can be supported in Cdk, I think. So what Cdk basically is doing for us. So Cdk has this concept of application, and application usually consists of one or more stacks, and stacks they will be created out of constructs. I will be talking about constructs a little bit later, but basically when you're creating a Cdk application, you can synthesize it and you will see the CloudFormation in JSON format, and it will be like assembled for you. And then CloudFormation will be deploying it with Cdk deploy command. So about the constructs, they are logically separated pieces of infrastructure, and there are 3 levels of them. I think Mark would like to speak more about his experience with different levels. I would say here that level 1 means that they are basically CloudFormation one-on-one dependencies. So they are very close to the same properties which are in CloudFormation. Level 2 is basically the ones which are already solving some of the issues. So they will be not just strings, they will be typed. For example, when you're providing runtime in Lambda, it will be saying that, okay, Node.js 12 or Python, so there will be enum for that. And the level 3, I think the greatest ones, because these are already patterns, and I have used it when I needed to deploy Fargate container with the load balancer. So just 8 lines of code for you all the whole working pattern. So what are the typical serverless projects? So from my experience, it's basically AWS Lambda, API Gateway, S3, SNS, SQS for PubSub, EventBridge, DynamoDB, and I will be having some examples about Cdk using it. So, for example, first one can be building alert. It's quite common use case, I think, for personal accounts that your spending is becoming quite a lot because you forgot some of the resources. I think it's quite often happening with us, even with the best of us. I would say that I just recently published a post about that, and people were saying, yeah, that's cool that you're raising it up. And I basically recommend to create one, but it's a Cloudwatch Alarm, which has this metrics, and it will be called estimated charges, and it will be publishing alarm to SNS, and the user will be subscribed to it via email in our case. Okay, there is some problem with the sound. Could you hear me well? Okay, okay, that's fine. So in Cdk applications, the main approach is basically you're starting from the end and saying that we need an SNS topic. So we are first provisioning the SNS topic. This is a construct level 2 because it's already having the properties which we need. Yeah, thank you for enlarging. And we are getting the SSM parameter, which is also nicely done in Cdk for email. And then we are adding subscription, and it will be in JSON format. And then we have billing alarm metric, which has this estimate charges, namespace, statistics, and currency. And after that, we are creating the Cloudwatch Alarm. So as I said, the construct level 2, it has enums and all the typed properties. So here is Cloudwatch comparison operator greater than or equal to threshold. So basically, you don't even need to think because you have just only the needed options. And yeah, metric is also typed, and threshold is I think it's just a number. And here we're connecting SNS sections and adding the alarm action here. So the second example here will be very, very basic setup of API gateway. So there is an API gateway endpoint, there is Lambda, and Lambda will be getting info from the DynamoDB. So first, again, we're starting from the very end. So we're starting from Dynamo table. So it will have the table name, it will be having partition key, and here is our Lambda, and it has this runtime. It has the code parameter, handler, all the usual suspects, I would say, in terms of properties. And after that, we can create our REST API, and then we can just do and create our resources, adding Lambda integration and adding method to it. So yeah, it's REST verb and Lambda integration here. And I would like you to notice how easy it is to connect Lambda to DynamoDB. I mean, giving the permissions, because I really dislike to allow things for Lambda. And here it's just very, very easy to do. You have the lowest ever solution for it. So it's super, super great, I think, to go such way that you're just granting the permission, and it's very straightforward. And what are the advantages we're getting for serverless with Cdk? So first of all, these are ready-made constructs, which are quite well done in terms of serverless, because they are widely used. Also, S3 are nice. SQS is also easy to provision. And the team can create internal reusable components, which makes Cdk as a great replacement for Terraform when you're not thinking to migrate to other clouds. And I think constructs here, they can be used as a whole modules, and you don't need to create the separate stack for this. Also, permissions, as I showed, are very nicely done in terms of just one-liner when you're can link the Lambda to DynamoDB. And also the other great example of CDK is now called Cdk Pipelines. It's a new way to provision CI/CD pipelines with code pipeline. It means that you're basically adding your implementation code, which is like, for example, Lambda with DynamoDB and API Gateway. It will be like a stage, and you're putting it in a very easy to use construct. And in 30 lines or so, you can set up the whole pipeline. And the most important thing that it can be self-mutated. So if the properties of the pipeline is changing, it means that you can just you can stop worrying about it, basically, because it will be changing on its own. So I think it's super important to mention the CDK pipelines and go check it out. I think the tips for starting on CDK will be like this. So you can go and create some small projects. It can be like small event in action. For me, the first project was reading from GitHub webhook and starting a pipeline. It was super small project. And then I also recommend to go and try gradual migration, where you can combine CDK and SAM, for example, together, because you can create, if you have a pipeline already created, you can put the CDK code, it will be synthesized, and it will be in the end the same cloud formation, which you will be deploying. And please share the knowledge inside the teams when you're adopting something, especially with CDK, because people are already fed up with the cloud formation, this 2,000 lines of code, and basically YAML is not a real code, it's just configuration. The main advantage of using the real code here is that you go and write the normal thing which you are doing every day with your business logic. After that, you go and do the infrastructure with the same language, with the same IntelliSense and code support, the same tools. I haven't mentioned, but CDK also has a unit testing, which is all super nice when you need to check the resources and the permissions, for example, how do they work with each other and how they are provisioned. Yeah, and the best part about CDK, you're just installing it. You are creating the folder. You are initializing the sample app. In my case, it's TypeScript. For you, it can be Java or Python. And then after installing dependencies, you're just going deploying it. That's it. That's super awesome tool to use, and I'm happy that last year I spent time in migrating from CloudFormation to CDK, or even starting the new projects in completely CDK way. So thank you for your attention. I will be glad to answer all your questions and go and build. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Igor. Let's check if there are any questions on Discord. I don't think so.
I don't think there's any questions on
No.
Discord. I did have
No.
a question, but you answered it right
Yes.
at the end for me, which was
Really?
about the unit testing to
I had the same thing.
to verify your deploy before you actually deploy it.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, CDK is quite smart. It will tell you that you're wrong quite easy. It's better than CloudFormation or any YAML templates because it will be giving you issues straight away in your command line. But unit tests are giving this capability of just checking what are you going to have in the end.
Okay. And can you do complex unit testing there? So, for example, if you're setting up a huge environment with subnets and things, can you check that you're not putting resources in the wrong subnet and that kind of thing with your unit tests? Can you go that deep?
I don't know. That's too complicated already for me. That's why I went serverless, I think. In order not to set up networking. Because my networking setup is getting the idea of the VPC, which is this isolated cloud environment in AWS, and use it for other purposes.
Okay.
Fair enough.
This is my typical work setup.
Okay. Cool.
Awesome.
I had a question myself, and that was more because related to the API, but specifically the API related to the different AWS services. But for instance, connecting it to the DynamoDB, which is a one-liner, which just grant the access. But for other services, it required a bit of more, or let's say more explicit setup. Is that due to maybe different defaults that are used, or is it because maybe different teams expose maybe different APIs that are being used by the CDK? Or is there a reason why it's so short for just a one-liner for DynamoDB and a couple of lines more for any other service?
I don't know the reason exactly, because I think CDK is working separately from CloudFormation team. But the one thing which I noticed that, for example, the typical use case of Lambda, when you have event trigger and you need to trigger Lambda from SQS, for example, is also one-liner.
Right. Yeah.
So especially in the case of serverless, it's super straightforward. That's why I was making this presentation to show that many typical problems already solved.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for the cool answers. Questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's too dark already here.
You sent me like the two links, so I didn't share them yet. So let me share those links now in the chat, so people can have a look at the source code themselves.
Yeah, one is for billing alert, which I showed, and another one for the serverless API, which has all the basic CRUD operations,
right,
and all the needed permissions.
All right, yeah. So this I'm sending now the billing alert, and the other one is the infra. Cool. All right, so people can indeed have a look at those links. I'll point to some nice GitHub repos where they can see a lot more about this.
Yeah, and I will copy them to the Discord channel during our break.
Yeah, excellent. All right,
Mark, what are you using for infrastructure, by the way?
Well, I deal almost exclusively with Azure. So
okay.
I don't have the CDK for that. So I do find it looks really nice. So that it looks really cool. So it's really a mix between all kinds of things. So there's a bit of ARM templates for Azure, but there's also quite some Azure CLI that is used. And for the latest project, I use Bicep. So that's
awesome.
That's a more also specific for Azure, but it's already a huge advantage over ARM, which was really very verbose. But Bicep is already a step in the good direction. But also, if you have to do a lot of infra setup, then Bicep is also still quite a lot of work, and also not unit testable. So having it like a language, and then any language like CDK or like Pulumi, which is of course a well-known one, that's really the future, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really nice. Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot for your talk, Igor, and hope to see you again next time. And
thank you very much.
Cool, and I think it's time for a small break then. Let's say 5-minute break.
Yep. Okay, we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Let's do that, and then we'll give the podium to Mark.
Tot straks allemaal.
See you guys.
Welcome
We're
back,
back.
everybody.
Hey, folks.
Hey,
Good.
Mike.
Welcome back.
Let me get rid of the banner. Right. I was looking at the screen at the overlay, and I'm noticing ServerlessDays Amsterdam 2020. And so, oh yikes! I forgot to update the banner for quite a while.
No, so if
And
you
it's
leave
been
it for another month or so, you can just skip 21 completely.
yeah. Well, I'm doing a bit of maintenance at the moment anyway of StreamYard and stuff. So I'll just remove the year completely, so we don't have to update that specifically anymore.
Oops.
Perfect. I think I don't have that in my slides, but you make me wonder now if I missed the year as well. Let's see. Let's just ignore it for the night, right? Let's not make a big deal out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
This isn't the date you're looking for. Move along.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like if time has been standing still for a while, right? In certain respects. So yeah.
Yeah. So, Marek, you're going to be talking to us next. And as Mark was saying at the beginning, you are also a member of our community, helping us organize these ServerlessDays things. So I think it's really nice to actually have one of the people from the organizing actually also on screen showing what we also know about this subject.
Absolutely. Yeah, got to raise the bar with that. So, I've been involved with the Meetup, I think, for like 3 years or something like that. It's been so long that I even met many people before COVID, right? Like that long ago. That's when I already joined. So I've been part of the conferences that we did when we could still get together. Also the virtual conference, which we ran last year and which we had to figure out. And still also very happy to participate in the meetups, whether it's virtual or whether it's face-to-face, doesn't really matter. I prefer, of course, the face-to-face ones, but still it's been a great community and a lot of fun to be part of. So yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. Very nice. All right. Let me add your screen to the session as well, and then we'll hide ourselves, Stace, and then the stage is all yours. Right?
Yeah, hide yourself
Take it
backstage,
away.
and I'll kick it off. Awesome.
Cool.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you so much. Like I was saying already, I've been wearing multiple hats. I've been a speaker at this event for a couple of times. I've also been an organizer, and also as of up until recently, I used to be with AWS. That's no longer the case, as you can see on this slide. So after 5 years of AWS and working with serverless teams, working with startups, and working also with other kind of customers, I recently took on a new challenge at Steady. So yeah, my employer has changed. I'm no longer with AWS. So this is also my first public speech actually as a Steady employee, hence the different template, and hence I had to make the slides myself. What hasn't really changed in that sense is that I'm still a very big serverless enthusiast. So I've been using, to maybe give you a bit of a background, I've been using AWS for probably 6 or 7 years. I first started using it at my 2 jobs ago. I started using it because we were adopting cloud and I got very interested. I wrote my first Lambda function probably 5 years ago, somewhere in 2016, when it was still a very limited service. I mean, it was already powerful, but you didn't have all the cool capabilities that I'm going to be talking about today. Then I joined AWS, was at Serverless there, and now actually I'm in a serverless company again. So yeah, it seems to be a little bit like a red line in my career so far, serverless all the way. So that's also going to be the case in this presentation. So yeah, what are we going to be talking about? And I'll just move my screen here really quickly. Yeah. So in this session, we'll be talking about, I'll talk to you a bit more about Steady, so the new company that I'm a part of. I think it's pretty interesting what we are doing, and it will also explain to you actually why we're so fanatic about serverless and in particularly step functions. Then we'll talk about that service itself, so I'll give you a very rapid overview of what step functions is, when you can use it. I'll also actually talk to you why I'm super excited to talk about this service. So many people, or I don't know if it's many people, but there's a lot of people I think that have heard of step functions. It's one of those messaging services in AWS that, maybe one day you could touch. But actually, as of recently, and I've been telling this to people at Steady, but also some of my friends, step function became pretty much my favorite AWS service. So you have to imagine from all of those 200 or so services that are there, this one messaging service is now the one that I spend the most time on, that I see the most potential in. and that I also very passionately want to share a bit more about today. So we'll spend a lot about what's new in step functions, what you could actually do with them, and why I think that immediately after this session you should give them a try. Throughout this presentation, and that's not really going to be a separate section, but something that I'll do throughout and hopefully also through the Q&A, I'll give you a couple of practical tips and tricks. So I've been spending probably not 5 years, but a couple of years using this service. I had, as many developers, I had a bit of a learning curve with it. It took a bit of a while, like Igor was saying with CDK, for me to get the hang of it, to understand it, to actually be efficient with it. So I want to make that journey as easy as possible for you as well. And I'll share, very practically a couple of code examples, how to get started, which tools to use, and so on. And then towards the end, we'll do a Q&A. So feel free to just, throughout this talk, put your comments in YouTube, Twitch, whatever streaming platform we're on right now. We'll pick them up and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end. All right, so let's talk for a minute about Steady. So the new employer that I've recently joined. I just want to give you a little bit of context about them. So we are a startup. We're a Series B startup that's founded 4 years ago. And we've taken on the grand mission of rebuilding the technological backbone of the business-to-business economy. So if you've never heard about, for example, the EDI protocol, I can very well imagine, right? I didn't know very well about it until I started working at Steady. But this is actually one of the frameworks that is being used for B2B transactions. So I made a very simple illustration at the bottom of how, for example, a very simple B2B process could look like. Let's say that these are maybe, that these are iPhones or laptops or shoes or, any type of item that is basically being traded. You will very often have a relationship where there's a producer, that's the little factory on the right-hand side. There then might be a distribution point or a warehouse or, anything in that order that basically takes these products and distributes them. That sounds really lame, but it means basically they store them and then they sometimes they keep it and then they basically forward it towards the retailer. And the retailer is the actual shop where you, for example, as a consumer go to buy that product, right? So this is a very simplified chain, right? The chain usually doesn't look this simple with just 3 parties in between. But basically the business where we are in is facilitating all of the transactions that need to happen between, for example, a retailer and a distribution party or warehouse. So you can imagine that, on one side there will be, for example, from the retailer, there will be orders going towards the distribution point, like, hey, we sold out all our Nike shoes or our iPhones, so we need to back order them actually from you, and can you get them as fast as possible to our shop? On the other side, of course, the producer or the distribution point, for example, will also need to send invoices or any other type of data basically to complete that transaction. I'm not going to bore you too much with EDI, right? It is quite fascinating if you're maybe bored at night or if you're really into this type of business. I definitely encourage you to Google around for EDI. Your mind probably will be blown by, first of all, how old the protocol is. So I'll have a couple of examples of it. It's actually a super ancient way of transacting, of doing B2B transactions. Basically since the 60s, and this is 1960s, right? So basically 50 plus years ago, people started figuring out to create something along the lines of a RESTful API or along the lines of standardization which they could communicate, but it didn't really evolve much yet, right? So basically Steady is trying to change that. And one of the examples, this is just a screenshot, but you can actually have a better experience if you visit the URL on the bottom. One of the ways that we, for example, do that is by providing translation tools or by providing, as we call it here, the inspector tool. What it allows you to do is to take these, very old and archaic files that you see on the left-hand side, right? So it's this really random kind of text string where you can see some numbers and some asterisks and whatsoever. There is actually so there is a message actually in there. And we can actually, with Inspector, just as an example, we can help you to decode that this is a purchase order. So this is EDI number 850. And then there's going to be a lot of different type of files, different formats in that as well, right? So I don't blame you if you've never heard of it. I didn't know about it either before joining Steady, but this is basically one of the things that is really, really critical and actually used at insane scale between retailers, suppliers, also in the finance industry and a couple of other industries. This is basically the reality that people are dealing with and some of the tools that we are actually creating to make that easier. So I'll move on to step functions in just a minute, but just wanted to give you also maybe a bit of a point, especially as I'm now a customer, right? I used to give this on behalf of AWS, but I can now actually give it from a customer perspective. What is it actually? What is the reason that we actually like serverless so much at Steady, right? Besides it being a cool technology, there's actually a couple of pretty good reasons why we made that why we made that technology choice to standardize on using these services as well. So the first one is very natural. EDI. So what I was explaining you very simply with the retailer and the producer and so on. That business is actually very event-driven by nature, right? So basically, there's always some sort of trigger when a message or an invoice needs to be sent. It's either because a customer bought something or because someone wants to do an invoice check, or there's always like some sort of event that happened. A shipment was sent, or a customer paid for something that basically triggers some sort of messages to happen. So this is a perfect match, actually, the technology and kind of the nature of the business match. The other thing that we very strongly wanted to do is to actually offer all of these various services like Inspector and our APIs. We wanted to offer them also as pay-as-you-go, right? So very similar to basically what AWS is doing with serverless. We want you to not pay for things like, for example, uptime or for, very complex pricing schemes. Ideally, we offer everything in a pay-as-you-go model where you basically pay, for example, for the EDI transaction that we handle for you, or for the translations that you do, or maybe for some sort of conversion step that you actually need to do to fully automate and optimize your B2B process. The third one, and again, you can see that these kind of like add on top of each other and amplify each other as well. AWS services are actually improving over time. So, you could see, I saw an example last night, for example, where for the secrets manager service, the limits got improved. We recently got treated with a new compute type for Lambda, right? So we can actually now use regular x86 Lambda functions, but we can also use ARM Lambda functions, which are cheaper and faster and so on. And, these are just two examples, but basically another really good benefit for us to standardize on serverless is that things are getting better, right? Sometimes these features, sometimes we need to enable something or we need to convert something to basically allow these features to work, like for example with ARM and x86. Sometimes we also see that basically AWS is making things faster and more responsive. And, we just wake up, we have our stacks running and our customers live on the platform. We wake up the next day and we see that, for example, latency dropped by 10% or something got cheaper. So those are the very nice surprises to have. And the fourth one, for some people, this is the most important one, but I think it's a pretty nice fact as well. We actually don't have any EC2 instances. I think we may actually have VPCs for something, but I'm not 100% sure. But we don't have all of this toil, and we don't have all of this, additional labor that you would have with patching servers or scaling it or whatsoever. We're just basically operating our business on a very different abstraction level, basically using everything fully serverless, which means that we have less operations and we can focus more time on actually building cool products. So I hope that was convincing and gave you a bit of a picture why we're so, basically across the whole company, why we're so enthusiastic about serverless. Good. That was my introduction. You now know a little bit more about me, what I've been doing, and a little bit about the company. So let's talk a bit about step functions. So for those of you that maybe have never worked with step functions is and these are, by the way, the terms that were copied just from the AWS website, as I think they capture it well. Step functions is a low-code visual workflow service. So what it basically allows you to do is to coordinate, or I should say actually orchestrate various serverless components that you might have in a particular workflow. A workflow could be anything, right? So a workflow could be, for example, a process where you have an input file and you need to launch several Lambda functions and maybe make a lookup to a DynamoDB table to get the output. A workflow could also be something like you see here on the right-hand side, where, for example, we have a couple of distinct steps that we need to take in order to convert an image. This is actually a sample from, I think it's called the Lambda image reference architecture, which you can find on the GitHub profile of AWS. I'll include the link later. But what it basically does, just to give you a bit of an idea of a workflow, in this case, we actually have images that are being delivered or uploaded by customers. we want to do, for example, on these images, we first want to extract some metadata. So that is the first part that you see on the top. So we want to see, for example, was this a mobile picture? Was it a DSLR picture or anything else like that? So we will have in that extract image data, image metadata, we will have, for example, a Lambda function that basically takes the input. So it takes, for example, the path of where the object is being stored. It will retrieve that object, do its magic to basically determine the metadata. And then basically once it's stopped that, it can pass on and on and on between all of these different type of steps, where there could be a Lambda function running or some sort of other serverless component that basically takes care of this conversion. So we would also do an image. We would also do an image check where, for example, we check if it's a, is this an image that we can convert? We support maybe JPEG and PNG, but a GIF file or GIF file, I don't know how you say it. That's something that we don't support. And then actually what you see, what's maybe the more interesting case here, wherever you see that little branch out, kind of like that parallel branch with recognition and thumbnail, that's where actually step functions can also give us a very unique capability that is pretty hard to build on yourself, where we could actually have two processes fire off at the same time, right? So what I mean to say with this, and this is also covered in my third bullet, you can either have these processes basically created which are sequential, right? So for example, they could be that there's a Lambda function that fires off, then there's another Lambda function and another Lambda function. And now step functions basically allowed us to, kind of decompose them and make them into 3 different type of steps. But we can do much, much more, like adding retries, branches, choice states, parallel states, adding, even things like, for example, what should be the backoff in case one of these Lambda functions or one of these commands failed? Should we, for example, wait for 1 second or 5 seconds before we retry? How many times should we retry it? And so on and so on. So especially when you're dealing with, I'll have a bit of a section later when to use step functions and when not to use step functions. But especially when you notice that, for example, either your Lambda functions that you have for some sort of process, they are getting too complex. Maybe there's a lot of business logic in them, or maybe they're so big to the level that they're reaching a timeout, or it's just starting to become too complex to basically have all of this logic in, for example, one Lambda function. That could be a good starting point for you to start looking at step function to kind of, start detaching them and having more individual steps that can take care of it. And then step functions basically takes the rest of the coordination. That was probably a lot of words. My apologies for that. But this is kind of like the high level introduction. And as we go through this presentation, hopefully this picture will become clearer and clearer for you as well. So one other example, I've given you the one here about, image conversion, for which I'll give you the link as well so that you can play around with it and take a look at the AWS one. One that I actually use myself, and you can also take a look at the source code here on the bottom at my GitHub page, or you can actually see the front end of the website that is powering this website. You can see where basically this step function is feeding in. Sorry for that. Is for my block feed reader. So one of the projects that I started when I was still working with AWS, I was struggling very deeply with, all of the releases that were coming up. It was usually, sometimes you would wake up in the morning and there were like 10 new things released again. So I wanted to basically create a simpler way to keep in track with the news, right? So I discovered at some point in time that AWS has all of these RSS feeds, which are basically XML-like feeds with news in them. And I started thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I can check all of those RSS feeds, basically analyze them and then get an email or some sort of notification whenever there's a new message. So what is kind of different about this example than the previous one is that we start off pretty similarly. So we have a starting point where basically the step function gets invoked. In my case, this is a time-based trigger. So I run this every 15 minutes. It could also be it could be based on an event. So it could be based on an event bridge event, or you can even connect things up, like, for example, an upload to S3 or many other type of things that you can do to kickstart this. But in my case, what I will actually do is I will first of all take a look at, what kind of, I will retrieve a list of all of the AWS blocks. I believe it's roughly 40 URLs or something like that I have. Then in the second stage, where you see that little squiggly box with get RSS blocks, that's where actually I can dynamically fire off one or multiple Lambda functions to do something in parallel, right? So why this case I think is interesting is that, imagine that you're maybe doing some sort of some sort of task that is basically very you can run in parallel, right? So imagine it could be Monte Carlo simulations. It could be, for example, retrieving a lot of URLs. It could be maybe converting a lot of files that are stored on S3, where you basically want to start a Lambda function and do some sort of processing on them. Basically, one of the cool capabilities with these state machines is that I can automatically, for example, spin up more or less Lambda functions to basically handle the load. Once all of those Lambda functions in that second box, so that get RSS blocks feed, have completed, then I can, for example, have a next step that again picks up the output of the previous step, does some sort of other conversion. In this case, I create a JSON file, which I keep for other purposes, and so on and so on, right? So even if this was maybe a little bit difficult to follow with all of the terminology and all of the concepts, what basically step functions allows you to do is to kind of connect all of these different blocks or all of these different components of a serverless architecture, like Lambda functions and steps that you and other steps that you need to create. You can put them in a workflow. You can connect them, kind of like stack them together like Lego bricks with each other. And AWS basically takes care of all of the coordination, the reporting, the execution of it, and whatsoever. So this was just a very quick introduction. I definitely wanted to bring everyone up to kind of like to have a basic understanding. But I'll now actually start diving deep into some of the newer features and also provide you with a bit of a demo and a bit of a visual overview of how this actually works, right? So you have actually a really good understanding of what the service could do for you. So these are, by the way, in case anyone is asking, these are 3 exciting features that I think are cool, right? So I don't know, this is not based on like someone official's list, or there's not like an official top 10 or whatsoever. These are just the things that caught my eye, and also I think the eye of a couple of people at Steady in the recent months, and that I think really show off, first of all, that the step function team is developing really with the right customers in mind. And second of all, it allows us basically to accelerate and develop much faster with this service as well. So before we actually dive into the first one, which was going to be the Workflow Studio, which I'll show on my screen, I wanted to just give you a bit of an overview of how step function authoring would work before this feature came out. So this is still a feature that is available, right? Whenever you want to create these workflows that I was showing you before, it used to be the case that you basically had to know this JSON-like syntax that you see over here. So Amazon created actually a couple of years ago the Amazon state language. It is a language that basically can be used to describe the state and the workflow and the transitions and also some of the JSON operations that a step function can do. And it is very powerful, right? So first of all, it's relatively readable, right? So even if it is the first time that you see these state languages, you can pretty much get a bit of an idea what's going on, right? We have, for example, a starting state. We have some task. I can also define that somewhere on that line where it says resource, we execute a Lambda function, right? We then have a choice state and a couple of variables and so on and so on. The problem is that kind of writing these things used to be very tedious, right? So there were a couple of tools that could help you with acceleration of that, such as linters and visualizers. And actually, in my case, GitHub Copilot helped quite a lot as well, because Copilot could kind of stitch together some of these components and tell me what the likely next step is. However, there's something that I think is purely brilliant that AWS released just a while ago. I'm just switching very quickly to my screen so I can start. But it's called the Workflow Studio. So give me just a second. All right. You should be seeing now. Oh, that was Inception. Yeah, I believe that you should be seeing my screen right now. So let me actually take you to give you just a very quick demonstration of this Workflow Studio. So I'm logged into the AWS console. So this is the same functionality that you can get in your AWS account as well. And whenever I go to the step function service, which you can find through the search or through the sidebar on the site, there's actually nowadays, instead of having to define this workflow in code, there's actually another option that became available, and that is this Workflow Studio. So let's actually take a look what this means. So instead of having to basically, use this JSON syntax and start putting my state machines together, which used to be tedious, it would pay off in the long run, but it used to be tedious. I can actually do things basically just as you would expect in a drag and drop interface. So for example, if I'm creating maybe something like I don't know, I want to now create a workflow where maybe I'm checking an external API, maybe it's the RSS feed that I'm using. I've just defined here the Lambda function. I can then, for example, transition it and, let me actually show you a different example. If I then have, for example, a second Lambda function, so this would be, for example, the first one, check API for new blocks. I could then, for example, add over here that second one, right? So receive RSS feed. This is where I would actually do the request. I can then start, for example, you saw maybe in that picture before as well, where I had I could do a parallel state, or I could do a mapping state where I have, for example, one or multiple Lambda functions running in parallel. So I can also very easily basically drag and drop that in here, right? So you can see that first of all, I get the visual feedback of what it is that I'm building. The other very nice thing about this as well, besides the visual component of how I can actually create it, is that I can here on the right-hand side, I can start, and I'll make this, I don't know how big your screens are at home. I'll try to keep this, this is really intended, I think, for bigger screens, but I'll try to keep it readable for you. I can basically start configuring, what are some of the parameters that I want to do. So what is, for example, the next state that I want to put in? I only have 2 of them here, but I could, for example, point them at each other. But I also get, in case I want to actually put this into CI/CD, which of course at most cases you should be doing, it will also actually automatically create that state definition for me over here, right? So you can see it's now coming with defaults, right? So I've only filled in the name, of course, and I didn't configure the actual Lambda function yet that should be firing off. But you can already see a little bit where this is going, right? I actually, right now, I think that AWS has something like a very credible low-code or no-code solution available. I'll show you actually how you can make it no-code, but then I'm spoiling a couple of things. But I think that this is actually fantastic, right? So if you've maybe ever had, if you've ever taken a look at step functions and you maybe found it too complex, or you couldn't get it to work, or you had big ideas but you never really found the time, I would very strongly encourage you to take a look at this Workflow Studio. The way that I actually use it, and I think a couple of other developers at Steady do as well, is that we will sometimes use this Workflow Studio kind of to cheat and to accelerate development, right? So what this allows us, for example, to do is to very quickly drag and drop together a state machine, right? So we can see it, we can model it, we can try a couple of things. We could either then, for example, continue over here and immediately execute it, as we could do before as well. But what it also allows us to do is to, for example, inspect the code over here, try to see how we actually want to put it, for example, in CDK, try to see maybe, what were kind of like the patterns that actually AWS uses in here, what are the different API calls that we can use, and so on and so on. So I see it really like, it is not, in our case, at least for Steady, but maybe for some of you as well, I don't think that the Workflow Studio fully replaces what we were doing with CDK and what we were doing with pipelines. What it does allow us to do is to actually much faster start developing. And, again, hats off to AWS and the team for actually getting a really good tool out that, in my opinion, even for whether you're a new developer or an experienced developer, this experience actually right now is fantastic. Before I continue, actually, I'll show you one other quick thing to maybe make you more enthusiastic about step functions as well. There's also, and this is actually something that came out, I think, a little bit before, but I find it extremely helpful as well. It's this data flow simulator. And what this actually allows you to do, so the workflow editor that I was just showing you before, that's kind of used to define the full state machine that you have, right? So you have this helicopter view where you can see basically the start and the end of the process and all of the various steps that are happening in between there. With this data flow simulator, I can much better start understanding actually what all of these various transition steps do. So with step functions, as we'll see actually in some of the demos later, there's basically this concept where, we're passing JSON documents in between each other. There's a JSON that I have as an input. Then some of these steps, besides running the Lambda function or whatsoever, they might also transition some of the text, right? So I could, for example, maybe only say in this example that I only want to, see the first movie in this list, right? Or I only want to filter, for example, when the director is Tarantino or something like that. This data flow simulator that you see over here, it can be used to basically start creating the, you can, as you can see over here on my screen, you can start to use this to basically start playing a bit with the data, right? So for example, checking what are the various input paths, how can I start selecting them, and how can I basically create the input and the output exactly as I want to. And then this is basically the syntax, this library.movies that I just created here. This is what I would actually put in my state machine in order to make this transition. So again, fantastic work in my opinion by the step functions team over here. Oh, that's Inception. Sorry for that. I'll reshare my my slides again. So the other part that I'm also super excited about actually, and this is also a new addition that we'll see in the demo in just a minute, is the fact that you can now make direct AWS SDK integrations. Sounds like a mouthful, right? So I'll explain a little bit more what that means. It used to be the case that with step functions, you could request a couple of services. The predominant one was Lambda, as you've seen in the examples that I showed you before. But now what you can actually do is you can also start making requests directly to AWS services. So a few examples of that are, instead of maybe using a Lambda function to read things from DynamoDB, you can automatically have step functions make that request for you. Basically capture, for example, the object that was stored in DynamoDB, where you need to maybe, provide the partition key and the sort key in order to retrieve it. But step functions will basically go retrieve that data for you automatically, pass it on into the state machine, into that JSON that I was just showing you before, and you no longer need a Lambda for that, right? So this is basically a feature where, AWS used to say, I think in many cases, that Lambda is kind of the glue, right? So whenever there's, for example, an integration, whenever there are two services that you want to make work together, but they don't have a direct integration or something like that, and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, how can I make this work? Basically, it used to be the case that you would often use a Lambda function for that. Now this direct SDK integration means that you don't even have to write the Lambda code, and you offload even more and more of that logic towards AWS, which, to be quite frankly, even though we're pretty good with observing Lambdas and monitoring them and altering them, AWS at the end of the day still knows better how to actually do this efficiently. So I'll show you a little bit later on as well how this works, how it's actually a big simplification. And based on my initial test, this is actually even performing faster than firing off Lambda functions for this automatically. So what changed? Maybe to put that a little bit in an illustration. Before it used to be the case, and this is just a extremely simple state machine, right? So this is just a state machine where I pick up a file, maybe it's submitted to me through, an API, or I pick it up from S3 or whatsoever. That doesn't really matter here. But it used to be the case that I had to have, for example, a function that would do the conversion, and then basically, for example, pass that output, and then I would have a second Lambda function that would do the upload, right? There was really no other way. I had within that Lambda function, I had to use the SDK to basically complete that request. Then ideally, in the before state, I would also, maybe add tracing to that. I would add logging, because of course that Lambda function might time out, or there might be an interruption, and then I'm losing data. The new state that you see on the right-hand side is, we will still use Lambda, right? Like, it's not that Lambda is dead or over or something like that. Some people might say it, but I think there's definitely still a lot of use cases for Lambda. But the big difference here is that we can start offloading some operations to step functions. So what this basically means for you is that you have one less Lambda function to manage. That's bonus number one. Bonus number two is also, I think, just having less moving parts around, right? So it's easier to monitor no Lambda than to monitor a Lambda. So this is a very nice way to actually start decomposing it and making it potentially more resilient. The other thing that I actually want to show you, and this is where I start meeting a little bit with the topic that Igor was talking about before, which was of course CDK. Is that, CDK actually and step functions are a match made in heaven in this case as well. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, if I want to make, within my state machine, doesn't matter really what it is, right? But imagine that at a certain point, I want to have a step where I receive a record from DynamoDB. It's actually going to be only these lines of code. It's, I think, 6 or 7 lines of code that I basically need to add in my CDK code. And at that point in time, if I have the right IAM permission, and if, for example, this DynamoDB table is working correctly that I specify over there, step functions will automatically retrieve the record for me, right? So you can, of course, imagine that Probably if you're doing this in Lambda, it will be maybe also 10 lines of code. It will be a little bit more if I start adding logging and tracing and those type of things. But again, we're basically at this point in time, I can start programming this type of logic to get, for example, that order ID out. And I'm not writing Lambda, right? So I'm basically just staying in my CDK template. I'm basically defining infrastructure at this point in time that is already capable of doing queries for me, which I think is still, I've been playing with this for a while. I think it's still pretty magical that that's available, right? That's a opportunity right now. One of the other things, and by the way, I should mention that with this example, it is very brief, by the way, because I'm using a very good CDK construct that does this, right? So what actually saves me a lot of code over here and a lot of complexity is that I can use this function that's called Dynamo Get Item directly, right? So very self-explanatory, but it basically just takes the table, the key, and then I added a result path to actually control where the result of this query should be stored. In case I have actually, maybe a completely different SDK request. So what you see here in the screenshot is, for example, an upload towards S3. It could also be, I don't know, start an EMR cluster, or I don't know, provision EKS cluster. I don't know. It could be basically any AWS command that I want. Basically, the way that I can handle that is I create a task, as you can see, somewhat shortened over here. So I specify that it's a task. I specify then within the resource what the API command is that I want to execute. So I do need to look that up. Typically, it's something like, the service, like for example, S3 over here. And then there's just the command that I want to do. So in this case, it was put object. And then there's going to be a couple of parameters that I need to add. So because of course the state machine needs to know what's the bucket that I need to put it in? What is the key? And the key actually in this case means you could consider it the file name. In this case, I'm actually also, since I'm actually using this, since I'm creating this file from the JSON documents that I'm passing in between each other, I actually specify the body directly, right? It was in my JSON. It was it was a field that was called event. So this actually, in this case, it's a task where I had to write a bit more code, but because the format is so predictable, and because basically the syntax is always the same, and because it also again works with more than 200 AWS services, you can basically start creating very crazy and very creative things like this. So maybe updating tags or starting instances or stopping, or I don't know what else you could, there's basically thousands of combinations and API requests that you could now in this workflow start calling like this. The other part as well, and I'll skip to this a little bit faster, especially as I have documented the full example that I'll be showing you in just a minute as well. Just wanted to maybe put out, Igor of course gave you the overview already of what's possible with CDK. But the syntax actually to create the state machine itself, so the state machine is actually, you could consider the workflow over here, is pretty simple as well. So I add a definition, I add a timeout, I add the type. I can also, which I would strongly recommend to you, I can configure how the logging should look like and where it should go. And basically I execute this and the state machine will automatically be created for me. So you can kind of see that, the state machine, but also the steps follow a relatively readable and easy syntax that allows you to create these state machines at pretty high speed. So at the end of the day, what that means, and this is just, I asked my friend Drake to explain this a little bit. What I would strongly encourage you, if you're dealing especially with this kind of like the scenario in the top picture where, you maybe have lambdas that are calling lambdas, that call other lambdas or something like that, right? You can see how this kind of like gets spreads very quickly. What I would encourage you is, there's in principle there's nothing wrong with the top method, right? In some use cases it might work easier, but I would strongly encourage you, if you have the opportunity to, for example, remove very simple lambdas. So maybe these are lambda functions that only do like a get or do like a put, or they do some sort of very simple operation that's basically just an SDK call. I would strongly encourage you, give it a shot to maybe try and replace those actually with this direct SDK integration. It's going to make, first of all, it's going to make your state machines a little bit simpler, right? So you will have less of these sort of anonymous lambda functions that are doing something in code, and it will be less predictable and basically more reliable for you to start creating them like that, like on the bottom. The third reason, and then I'll actually start showing you some things as well, because I've only been boring you with slides and memes so far. The third point, I think that is very interesting as well, and this is maybe not necessarily a very new feature, but it's still something that adds up very nicely to this, is that monitoring and observability with step functions is pretty awesome. So what many people actually don't know is that you can enable things like X-ray tracing. So X-ray tracing is actually used for application monitoring or application tracing. It allows you to, for example, see what type of API requests were made, what the latency was, whether they were successful. So it's kind of like a stack trace, you could say, maybe of your workflow. You can actually enable this with one line of code in Cdk, right? So instead of maybe having to instrument Lambda functions and add, maybe the X-ray SDK or the Power Tools, which is a fantastic SDK for it, you can actually just go ahead and, as you saw that's on this slide, I think under tracing enabled. So that's the fourth line over here. That's what you add basically. And that allows you to create beautiful trace maps like you see the one over here, right? Where actually, I'll show you in the console in just a minute what this actually means and how this works. But here we can actually see that we now have a state machine. That's that little icon with the boxes in the middle. That, for example, that state machine can now automatically call DynamoDB, but it can also, for example, put things on EventBridge automatically for us, right? So in order for you to basically get this map out, there's one line that you need to enable. Again, you can also set up pretty detailed logging for it. So you could log all input and output events. You could also choose to log, for example, all the errors. And obviously, as always, they end up in Cloudwatch logs. The other nice thing that I think is pretty helpful as well, that you don't have to do anything for, is just a set of helpful Cloudwatch metrics that you can actually see. You just see 3 of them here on the bottom. But you can basically start getting a pretty good idea as well of the executions that were successful, how many started, were there any errors. There's even, I believe, a metric where you can get an indication of what the service is costing you, or basically what the charge is for what you're doing as well. So this is pretty awesome and powerful in my opinion. So let me actually, because I've showed you now the X-ray overview as well. So let me actually flip over again, and I'll apologize for maybe any quick glitches that this is going to give. I'm just going to switch back quickly to my screen and just give you like a 5-minute demo before we head into the Q&A about how this actually works and what some of the crazy things are actually that I've been experimenting with and playing with at Steady with this. So one of the state machines that I've actually created recently, especially after this SDK integration came out, and I'll just very quickly, I think it might be the easiest way if I actually show you in the workflow editor. So again, apologies if you have a smaller screen. It might be, I'll try to crank it up as much as possible, but this is a pretty complex picture, unfortunately. So one of the things that I actually started thinking was like, can you actually create something like, some of you might be familiar with kind of the classical way to create classical. I make it sound like it's very old, but like the standard way to create an API on AWS, right? You would use an API gateway, you would maybe have a Lambda function, and then a DynamoDB table where, basically this allows you to query data from a DynamoDB table, to put it, to maybe do a scan and anything else like that. And I figured it would be kind of interesting to see if I can now create this without a Lambda function, right? So I don't want to have that Lambda function in between. I definitely do need to have some sort of endpoint or some sort of way that I can query it. And I do have a database, but I want to be able to kind of, allow requests through that and ideally try to see how I can do that without a Lambda. So I created what's kind of looking a little bit like a monster now because I've added a little bit too much bells and whistles in it. So maybe let me not focus on this and just show you kind of like what is possible right now and also show you how you could actually interface with this service. And, also how this works latency-wise, cost-wise, and so on, so that you have a really good idea of how you could potentially start using this yourself. So what I have created is I created a very simple, and I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see this easier. I created a very simple DynamoDB table, which is basically like my ordering or like my stock overview, right? So what we have right now in Marek's shops are we have 5 pizzas for sale, quantity 5, and we have 7 shoes, right? I'm not super creative, but I'm pretty sure that everyone needs pizzas and shoes. So I figured that's what I'll start selling. And what I wanted to do basically, this is kind of like my data store, right? So there could be more data in here. There could be maybe the barcode or some other product description or whatsoever. But I wanted to focus basically on how I could start using step functions and, in order to start either inserting, removing data, scanning data, and so on and so on. So what I've done, and I can show you whenever within the state machine step function console, I create a new execution, which basically means that I wanna invoke the workflow and I want to run through it and then basically get the output out. There's a couple of things that I can do. I could, for example, in this case, I want to do a get method. So this is the way that I actually created my schema and that I modeled it in step functions as well. And I want to get, for example, data out for order ID 1 to 3. Okay, great. Let's see what happens. So we completed the execution, as we can see over here. You saw that it's completed near instantly, but it actually took us 174 milliseconds, which is, way less than a second. It's basically 1/5 of a second. And what we can actually see over here, what the state machine did for us, so this complex beast that I was showing you before, it took the input that I've given it, so give me back order 1 to 3. And if it went well, actually, in this case, this is an order that was in there, right? So you could actually see, I'll show you just so that I'm not cheating. There is actually an order ID here with order ID 1 to 3. The product is shoes, and we still have seven of them available, right? So this actually worked correctly. The state machine basically in 124 seconds, without any lambda, 124 milliseconds, without any lambda functions, without any complex business logic, managed to get this data out for us. Now to show you that this is actually not a cheat, we could add, for example, number 555, right? Which you saw is not an existing number in my DynamoDB table. In this case, what actually happens, the execution took 138 milliseconds. So again, pretty fast, pretty responsive in case this would be, for example, behind an API. But we can actually see that the state machine, so what it tried to do is it first of all, it validated the input that I've given it here. So it saw that I entered a valid get method. It also saw that this is a valid digit that it should check. But basically, it's, again, without any lambda functions or whatsoever, it is telling me right now, based on the output status of that state machine and based on some of the conditions that I put in, that this order ID does not exist, right? So it does exit gracefully in this case. It does return kind of like a level 200. But based on the error syntax that is actually appearing here, I can actually see that this order ID does not exist. And of course, then in my application, whatever else I'm doing here, maybe I'm querying for order state or anything else like that, I could of course start handling this in different ways. Now, the very last thing that I want to do before we get to Q&A, so it's your last minute kind of to get those questions in if you have any, just wanted to show you also how this works from a tracing and from a visibility perspective. So I was mentioning to you before that one of the big benefits is that you can, you get tracing kind of like for free. You pay a little bit for it, but you just have to add one line of code in order to get it done. So what we can actually see right now is that, and I'll just change the views here a little bit. I'm very sorry, this is a difficult console to show on smaller screens, or to kind of like make it smaller. But we can actually see over here that, we can see first of all the map. So we can see what are the components that were involved. We can see the state machine. We can see that there was actually an event towards EventBridge that I also sent out actually in that time. We can see that there was a request towards DynamoDB as expected. But one of the coolest things, in my opinion, is actually having kind of this histogram that you see over here, where we can see the duration. So we can see, for example, the total duration of how long this workflow took. We can also, and besides that, we can also start seeing some of the check conditions, right? So we can see, for example, we checked if the method field existed, which took us 1 millisecond. We checked if the order ID is present, which took us 0 milliseconds, maybe a little bit more, but basically a fraction, very fast. Getting the DynamoDB record took 27 milliseconds. So, there had to be, of course, an API request and Dynamo had to return it, but it was pretty fast and it returned a 200 OK. And then actually over here you can see also that this was for the last order. Because this event was actually not found, right? Because we entered 555 and that's not one that's existing in our DynamoDB table. We also actually added an event towards EventBridge. So we added an error that took 57 milliseconds to post. And then we basically completed it. So this was my rapid demo. I'll flip back right now, although I think this was all of the content that I had. I'll flip back very quickly to my slides. And I think in just a minute we'll go towards Q&A. If the hosts are still with me and if they have any questions that they can present with as well. So I'll put up this mandatory last slide. Thank you for watching. Oh, you maybe already removed it. I had a thank you slide and that's fine. I can do it for you
anymore.
Awesome.
No, but thanks, Mark. Are you still muted these days? No, this is really cool. It's really insightful.
Yeah,
I've heard about step functions indeed. Yeah, I've looked at it because it's of course very close to logic apps and durable functions.
It is.
Stays and I know in Azure.
Yeah.
But indeed, there's still quite lots of new things in it, at least for me as well. So that it can do more than just chaining or mapping, reducing lambdas. So it's nice to see that you can make, like, let's say, direct CDK calls in step functions. That's really cool. Yeah, I really like the idea that you can need that AWS has more. Allows you to do more abstract calls to their own API and own services without you having the need to wrapping it into functions or into more code, which is basically more overhead. So
the best code is the code that you don't write.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you. I know that you're supposed to ask the questions, but I'll ask you the question first. Like, how different is this actually from logic apps? Because I'll tell you that I can now talk freely. I don't work for AWS. No, I could talk freely, but I'm now, of course, not working there anymore. I've always looked at logic apps with a bit of jealousy, right? In the sense that I think it had this drag and drop concept already, right? Yeah. It had also, I think, a lot of these connectors or whatever you want to call it. But how do you actually view this as the logic apps expert, I guess, right? Like you've worked with it extensively as well, I think.
Well, for me, it's mostly durable functions. So I've mostly create orchestrations in code, and then less so with the visual designer. But I did use it in it occasionally, and then this comes the closest to it in it. So I think the closest relative in AWS space, and what's in Azure is in it than the logic apps. But I think what it does is, set aside. Well, I think a logic app should also have all of these connectors to, of course, Azure's own services, but also lots of other connectors to other kinds of third-party APIs. So there's a bit of a difference in between the two. But I think it's really nice to have these low-code options available.
Absolutely, especially with things like the timeline at the end. So you've got this low-code interface to actually create your things, but you can then go in and you can investigate when you have a performance issue of which part of this step is actually costing the time, so you know what you need to optimize when you got issues. It's that can be a real help when you suddenly start to put real load on something and it's not quite doing what you hoped it was going to do.
Yeah, which still happens, right? It looks easy, things still go sideways sometimes, but I think just like you, I'm overall excited. No matter what the provider is, I'm overall excited with making development more accessible, right? So even I think and I'm happy to admit it as someone who's developed for a long time, I actually like to develop less, right? So if I can offload things, if I don't have to write code, there's nothing cool in having your own orchestrators and own workflow engines. I think it's fun as a project, but when you're actually building things for maybe a business or something, keep it simple, keep it accessible, and the more people can participate, the better, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. Right.
Awesome. So now you can ask questions.
I just got to make a comment at the beginning because I put this in the Discord channel too. You started off your presentation and you were talking about EDI. And I was transported back to the 1990s when I had to implement EDI using an X25 network, if I remember rightly, at a time when it was still on dial-up. The company I worked for had a dial-up internet connection that you heard the modem go when you tried to make a call to the internet from your machine.
Wow.
And it was an absolute nightmare to do at the time. And it's like, EDI, what? EDI's still a thing? I mean,
it is.
It is a really powerful system. I mean, we were using it. I was writing contract jobbing software. So we were using it for factories to communicate with suppliers, etc., that kind of thing.
Amazing.
And it was supremely useful, but an absolute nightmare with the tools and the languages of the time. And it was just a nice flash in the past for me as that came past.
Awesome. I mean, I cannot tell you what happened in those 20 years. I get the idea that not much happened, that it's still an unsolved problem. So
the tooling looks better at least.
But I think it's I guess like with a lot of technology, it's there's still a lot of problems that we can solve, I think, better with technology, right? EDI, kind of like, I guess, like with these workloads that we're just talking about, it requires very in-depth knowledge. It's as you probably remember when you were working with it, it's also very, I call it user hostile, right? Like with the file that I showed before. Maybe you had to parse them by hand or something. I can't even imagine that.
That is literally what I was doing. I was having to parse those by hand and build them by hand. It was
Oh, that's crazy. Wow. I gained a lot of respect for you right now that you that you managed to do that. That's amazing. Cool.
I wouldn't like to do it again.
No, I'd imagine. Yeah, hey, if it ever comes up, come take a look at Steady, right? We've got tools and solutions for this, so.
I might have to do it just to dive back in and see what it is again.
Get a flashback. Yeah, cool.
So a couple of questions for you. It's what do you think's still missing? What do you miss in there that you wish was still there?
That's a good one. I think actually a little bit what you were just saying before, the two of you, with I'd love to have maybe simpler ways to connect outside of AWS. So even though there's a lot of things, there's a significant amount of things that I can offload now, like calls to Dynamo or S3 or whatsoever. I think there's still a requirement to keep a Lambda basically whenever you're talking to something outside of AWS. I think there's a few ways that AWS could solve this. So, maybe with like a managed API request or something like that, which sort of EventBridge has, but I'd love to see that maybe natively in step functions. I think kind of like that extensibility would be great. Maybe even, and that would be, again, maybe for different type of use cases than what we are doing, but maybe even integration with something like Zapier or, if this then that or something like that. Maybe that's not what's going to work like at tremendous scale, but I think still making kind of, because basically what I'm aiming at is that I think AWS is a very powerful tool right now with especially the graphical component. Again, I cannot compare it to Logic Apps. I haven't worked with it, but I'm finally seeing after years of JSON, it makes me incredibly happy to be able to actually drag and drop something together in a GUI, right? And I could explain it to everyone basically. I hope that they iterate on that to even extend it more, to even allow more things to be possible. That would be really amazing. I'll probably have more features because a lot of these things were pretty fresh, pretty new. Probably if you ask in a month or two, we'll have like a bigger list. Right now we're still very much in exploration mode, especially with these SDKs, as it's only out for 2 weeks. But it's again, I'm happy to put this on stream. It's right now my favorite AWS service team from the 200 that are there, so that's really amazing. Welcome back, Mark. Not sure what happened.
You're muted, Mark. You're doing a me.
Typical. All right. There was still a question in Discord. Our other speaker Igor asked, how could one decide whether to choose step functions or still, let's say, plain or classic lambdas with SQS and SNS?
Oh, good question, and I'll chat with Igor anyway. Because there's a very long answer and it's a typical question, but I'll give you the shorter one. I think you can solve, I think, a lot of things with. So I didn't put this in my presentation, but there is a difference between what is called coordination and orchestration. This is maybe a little bit theoretical, but what it basically comes down to is that whenever you are, for example, chaining these Lambda functions together, you can get pretty far with that, right? So if you have kind of like this sequential process, I think you could do it, Lambda Q, Lambda Q, Lambda Q. At some point in time, it becomes really difficult to keep an oversight top down, right? So you won't really be seeing that Lambda number 3 is breaking or something like that. I think the other thing is also that you might actually get use cases where you need a bit more logic. So especially, and you know, this is, I think, the main important feature of step functions, I think, is that input document, that input JSON that you actually provide, that also determines a little bit what actually happens in the state machine. So in many cases, it can be that it just fires off one Lambda. It could also be multiple Lambdas or something like that. It's also one of the reasons that I actually added that kind of like that branching out or that parallel step. Doing something like that, I mean, I can think of like a couple of like hacky ways to do that. It's not something, it's difficult, probably on Azure as well, right? Like you could maybe from one Lambda function issue like 5 commands to start 5 Lambdas, but
it's difficult. Yeah, so that's
fan in, fan out, and those type of things. And one other thing, especially that I think we value a lot at Steady as well, is things like actually being able to control a little bit better what the retry should be. So for example, I could, you know, with one line of code right now, I could say retry this step 10 times with maybe 10 seconds in between. If it then fails, send me an SMS or an email or something like that. It's hard to do that, I think, with, you know, just kind of the primitives of queues and functions. I prefer this way definitely to that.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Cool. Good.
All right. I think.
Excuse me, I'm losing my voice.
Don't get emotional. It wasn't that good.
I had my flu shot last week, and it's really started to hit me today.
Oh no. Okay.
So maybe it's a good job we're not in person today.
Let me quickly pull up Igor as well in our stream, so we can say goodbye and thank you to both our speakers. So Igor and Mark, thanks a lot for your sessions. It was also I actually enjoyed it that we were both quite aligned. First with CDK and in step functions, still using CDK functionality. So it was a very nice train of these two presentations. Awesome. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, and I definitely hope to see you. Again,
hey, Mark, time. When is our next meetup? Do we have that planned already?
Yes, it's the 1st of December. Because that's the first Wednesday of December. So the some of the admin stuff is already ongoing. We have some kind of lineup for speakers already, but not really set for the date yet. So we still have to confirm with them. But also, if people are listening or watching right now and you want to speak, please reach out because we definitely would like to give you an opportunity to speak at our meetup.
Yeah. And as Mark was saying at the beginning, if you've never spoken before but you want to give it a try, please get in contact because we'd love to help you get started on your speaking journey.
Exactly.
I would say these guys are amazing. They are helping so much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stace.
Cool.
You're welcome. Cool. Thank you for your time.
All right. Enjoy, everyone. Until next time.
Ja, verder gaan we allemaal.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.